Hey, it's Sunday, a perfect day to talk about atheism, right? I mean, why not, right? I don't know. I happen to like doing these types of reviews on Sunday. It kind of works out well because Sunday is typically a day people go to church and talk about theology, talk about philosophy. So this kind of works out pretty well. That I'm going to be having a review of a Rationality Rules video that he entitled The 100% Real Definition of Atheism, as opposed to the 100% fake definition of atheism, which, of course, there's no such thing. So I'm going to kind of go through this. I am going to do it at 1.5 speed, only because it gets rid of about 5 or 6 minutes. It's about a 23-minute video, and by doing it at 1.5 speed, it cuts it down by 5 or 6 minutes. I'm going to try to do this pretty quickly. Unfortunately, there are people coming in and out today all day long. The house is showing from the realtor, so I don't have a lot of time between visits. I don't want to be doing this when people are trying to like look around the house and stuff like that, because the house isn't for sale. But if I get down to an hour and a half, I think I'll manage. So yes, I'll turn on closed captioning for the feline, who, according to other people, isn't deaf enough, I guess, you know, because they're ableist. But that's a different video altogether. If you want to dive into that, go watch Cheshire's video on Friday. It's well worth the review if you decide to do that. In fact, we love people reviewing our stuff. It doesn't happen enough. So if you want to review this video, that's great. I hope Rationality Rules does. He mentioned to me that he was making his video prior to making it. Said I probably wouldn't be disappointed. He wasn't wrong. I mean, again, I think that he did a really good job. His video skills are on point. I mean, let's put it that way. That dude is really good at that. And I think, again, baby steps. He's come a long way. I mean, comparative to, you know, a couple years ago when Rationality Rules and I would have conversations, you know, he wasn't much understanding what I was trying to explain to him. And in fact, most of the points in the video he made are points I've been making for years. Not saying that he got them from me explicitly. I mean, he did his own research, obviously, but he found the same thing that I have found. And he probably did, you know, notice that I have been saying things for quite some time, because he happened to give a shout out to me. Appreciative. So he did let me know that he was going to be doing that video. And I was like, great, you know, I'll do a review of it, and this is that. So hopefully he'll watch this. He'll maybe take it and review this one, or at least review some points out of it. I mean, he doesn't have to like review the actual video, but I think that while he makes some very good points, I think he kind of misses the big picture on a couple things. But again, baby steps, right? So I'm just going to start playing this video. Then I'm going to be stopping it every so often to kind of give you my points on it. He has apparently gone the way of Alex O'Connor, aka Cosmic Skeptic. Both of them are becoming philosophically trained formally in college, and of course, as I've been stating for how long, in academia, in college level, in the academic literature, atheism is normatively, and what I mean by that is usually the case normally, and also that if you want to read the papers, you ought to accept that definition as how the person is using it in their papers if you want to understand the paper. So it's normative in that aspect as well, and because normative usually kind of means normal, or it also can mean you ought, right? It can be kind of prescriptively, but it's a soft prescriptive. It's not that you must. It is a soft prescriptive that if you want to read it something correctly, you got to know the terminology, just like in science or biology or medicine. You got to understand what the paper's talking about, because they use a language that other people in that field or domain of discourse are going to use. So, all right, so here we go. And by the way, I am watching the live chat, so if you got some things to add on at me, and I will address them. Here we go. There we are.
I'm also increasingly entering into this debate about the usage of the word atheism, and whether it's appropriately used to describe simply a lack of belief in God. I've always very strongly advocated that atheism just means a lack of belief in God. But studying at university, I found that this just kind of doesn't exist in the academy, right? Like in academic works, it's always used, the term, atheism, and it's always defined in all the dictionaries, all the philosophical dictionaries, as the belief that God does not exist.
Why, hello, my fellow apes. I hope you're well. Around a month ago, Alex O'Connor, the fifth horseman of New Atheism.
I hope it should be clear by now that I'm really not trying to affiliate with the New Atheist movement.
All right.
Yeah, let me. I can't help but touch on this. Just losing your mind. Oh, I did turn it on. I'm sorry. I turned it on, but I guess it clicked off. It is on. The closed captioning is on. So, okay. So Alex O'Connor, for the longest time, was obviously advocating for I'm not gonna say lack of belief position. I'm just gonna call it strong and weak or positive or negative atheism. That's just generally how it's referred to. Positive atheism is not the way the atheist community of awesome uses it, as in a smiley face. Positive atheism is the assertion God doesn't exist. Negative atheism would be merely the non-acceptance of the proposition God does not exist. So Alex O'Connor has always been typically, historically, an advocate for you want me to start it again? All right. I'll start it again.
I'm also increasingly entering into this debate about the usage of the word atheism and whether it's appropriately used to describe simply a lack of belief in God. I've always very strongly advocated that atheism just means a lack of belief in God. But studying at university, I found that this just kind of doesn't exist in the academy, right? Like in academic works, it's always used, the term, atheism, and it's always defined in all the dictionaries, all the philosophical dictionaries, as the belief that God does not exist.
Why, hello, my fellow atheists.
And well, that's not necessarily the case, though. In almost most dictionaries, philosophical and otherwise, that is how it's defined. But again, that is descriptive. In the Oxford Handbook of Atheism, Stephen Bullivant does, and Rationality rules points it out. Stephen Bullivant, who is a theist, by the way, does advocate for the negative atheist use only for utilitarian type purposes, for utility, and for etymological reasons, which, again, Rationality rules does point out doesn't make much sense to do it that way. But there are some that do use just the negative position for atheism. However, they're very far and few between. But again, there's just descriptive, right? And that description holds true. If I want to describe a theist, I can describe a theist as a person who believes God exists, or I can describe a theist as a person who does not believe God does not exist. Both of those are perfectly fine descriptions that describe a theist. Atheism the same way. You can describe an atheist as a person who believes God exists, or you can describe an atheist as a person who does not believe God exists, right? Because if you believe God exists, you don't believe God does not exist. So if it works for atheism to do it as a strong and weak, then it has to be for theists as well. And that goes to the WASP argument, as people know, and we'll get into that. So
I hope you're well. Around a month ago, Alex O'Connor, the fifth horseman of New Atheism.
I hope it should be clear by now that I'm really not trying to affiliate with the New Atheist movement.
All right, fine. The first horseman of New Atheism expressed potential endorsement of atheism being defined as the metaphysical proposition that there are no gods, as opposed to the epistemic psychological state of simply lacking a belief in God.
Okay, do you want me to slow this down? If you guys, I play it at regular speed. That's too fast. All right, I'll play it at regular speed. That's fine. Oops. I'll do that. All right, so this.
Psychological state of simply lacking a belief in gods. This, no doubt, made the likes of Steve McRae and Cameron Bertuzzi erect in more ways than one. And it also I
don't know what he means by erect. I don't know. I listened to that, and I'm not quite sure what the heck he was talking about when he was talking about erect. I mean, I could imagine, but I don't know why. I don't know. I thought that was weird, but that's okay. It's quite all right. I don't mind. He's not harassing me, not by any means. But he does note there's a epistemological or epistemic position for, or excuse me, not well. It's a psychological position for atheism as opposed to propositional. That's kind of what he's noting here.
Resulted in a few of you asking for my views on the matter. Well, I've been meaning to share my views for quite some time now, since the gatekeeping by some atheists, and indeed some theists, has escalated to frankly absurd degrees,
I agree with
it now genuinely averting earnest intellectual exchange.
Absolutely
so what I aim to achieve here is two things. The first is to defend both definitions of atheism. Yes, both. And the second is to encourage everyone, no matter which definition they prefer, to greater appreciate why others might prefer the other definition.
And that's perfectly fine. I see where he's trying to go on this, right? He and Alex O'Connor have both recognized that what I've been saying for years is correct, that there are multiple uses of this term. It is polysemous. I am not the one advocating that only one usage is correct. I've never advocated for that. Anybody who ever tells you otherwise is lying through their teeth. You can go to my blog and go to my entry on my straw man abatement. And under straw man abatement, it has all the positions I've had since 2018. On that particular topic. And it's not all-inclusive, but I mean, it generally gives you the details. I'm not a prescriptivist. I'm a descriptivist. However, there are times to be a soft prescriptivist, which, again, just merely means is something along the lines of like, look, if you want to become a doctor, you ought to go to medical school, right? I mean, there's just a soft prescriptive to be had. If you want to understand a paper on astrophysics, you ought to learn astrophysics, the terms, how they're used, right? Same thing here. If you want to read a philosophical paper on atheism, you ought to use the philosophical usages, because that's how almost all of them are going to use it. Goddess Scumber, 2 pounds. I'm the first horseman of the new atheism. Oh, this is going to get bad, right? So well, do they cancel out? I mean, after, is it like, I don't know how that would work. New atheism would probably be much like the old atheism at some point. It's like the horseshoe theory or something.
But before we delve into the details, let's just hear a few examples of what theists and atheists have to say. Where's my cup? I need a fresh coffee.
That's what I'm drinking now, by the way. Good on him. I'm drinking coffee as well.
What does atheism actually mean? If you look for an answer here on YouTube, you'll pretty much find the same one across the board.
Atheism. Atheism is only the lack of belief in the existence of God or gods.
It is a lack. By the way, I'm going to stop it there real quick. YouTube atheism, not the same as what you'd find in the literature. Again, this is why a lot of people just get their information from YouTube. They don't learn about atheism. People that learn about atheism by watching the Atheist Experience, I will tell you straight now, are probably the dumbest atheists I've ever met in my entire life. They learn nothing. They know nothing. They parrot and they get everything wrong. And this is why I've had these types of altercations and interactions and poor interactions with people that just cite, Matt Dillahunty as some authority on atheism. But all these people, they're going to be like, oh, it's only lack of belief. That only is where I've always drawn the line, right? If you want to say atheism is a lack of belief in God, well, there's some truism to that, right? Theism is a lack of belief that God does not exist, which I've been pointing out forever, which Rationality Rules, people know his name, Steve. It's a good name. Has pointed out as well. I mean, now people are running the same arguments I'm running and talking about the same things I've been talking about for 5 years now, because that only is where you get into trouble. If I would say atheism is only the belief that God does not exist, I would expect people to push back on me, but I've never said that. They're the ones saying only. American atheists only say only. That has been my argument for 6 years, 7 years, 8, I don't know, for a long freaking time. That only is where they jump the shark, Even if they say atheism is lack of belief God does not exist, sure, but theism is a lack of belief that God does not exist. It's the same exact reasoning. There is no different. That is the crux of my WASP argument, that if you allow for one, you've got to allow for the other, or else you are special pleading. There's nobody that's assailed that argument yet.
Lack of belief in God.
A lack of belief in God.
Someone who lacks a belief in God.
So if you're an atheist, it's just simply lacking that belief.
God, and by the way, she's the worst. Jacqueline Glenn is the worst spokesperson for atheism and the history of atheism. I mean, bar none. I'm so glad that she doesn't do it anymore, because she's just horrible. I always liked Alex O'Connor, and I've always liked Rationality Rules. I thought they at least took an intellectual approach. Did I always think they were incorrect on this? Yes, of course. But we've always managed to be civil. Neither one of them ever took it personally. Neither one of them. And I cannot tell you how much I respect that of both of them.
A lack of a belief in a particular deity.
All it means is I lack belief
I don't know who she is.
Atheism is, in a broad sense, the unbelief in God, or the belief that there is no God. Many atheists argue that it's a label that shouldn't really exist at all, as we don't create names for other non-belief systems.
Other non-belief systems don't have 2 billion adherents. Probably is the reason why. If there's 2 billion people that believe in Santa Claus, there might be a name that naturally crops up, in the etymology. So, I don't know why that's an argument from atheism. It's a bad argument. The words have usages because they convey something, right? And when you say theist or atheist, they convey something to people that with regard to a particular proposition that billions of people deal with. So, I think that's part of the reason.
Atheism is not just the absence of belief in God. An atheist is a person who maintains that there is no God.
An atheist is somebody who doesn't believe there's a God. I am not convinced there's a God. That doesn't necessarily mean I'm convinced there are no gods, although that is a subset of, hey, I don't believe there's a God, and then there's a subset that is, I believe there are no gods.
And I don't say this often, but Matt Dillahunty is absolutely correct. But of course, that's what I've been saying, and he's been saying I'm wrong on that. If you look at my Venn diagram, and if you go, do you want me? I'm not going to put my Venn diagram right now, but if you will go look at my Venn diagram, you can see it on my Twitter. Just type in Venn in my name. It actually shows that exact same thing, that strong atheism is a subset of weak atheism, of course. And also, strong theism is a subset of weak theism. Same reasoning. Again, the WASP argument. So both of them are right. William Lane Craig is correct, and Matt Dillahunty are both correct. However, they're talking about two different things. But if you change that word atheism to theism, they would be correct as well, just by putting it in the negation. So if you want to define atheism as the lack of belief God exists, then theism is the lack of belief God does not exist. So yeah, both of them are correct. I don't know who these people are. They're saying that you cannot use either definition. I'm not familiar with who was saying that. Maybe Cameron Pertuzzi was. I don't watch that much of his stuff. I mean, I happen to get along with Cameron. I have no issue with him. I think that he is hyperbolic, and I think he goes out of his way to have bad sophistic type arguments. I think he does that on purpose just to get a rise out of people, which I'm not a fan of. But personally, I have no issue with him. And Trig Feline is putting the Venn diagram in the live chat, and I'll put it in the video description. But it's a Venn diagram that I created, then Landon Kurt Knoll helped me with the legend on it. So I call it the McCrae-Knoll Venn diagram. And again, nobody's shown it to be incorrect.
Bro, I just lack a belief that evolution is true. That's it. I'm an evolutionist. I'm not making a claim that it's false.
Yeah, but see, that's disingenuous because every person I know that knows biology accepts evolution. Right? I don't know anybody that's agnostic on evolutionary theory. Either you accept it or you don't. I mean, there could be some people out there. I'm not saying it's impossible, clearly. But for the most part, the people I deal with that are in the biological field all accept evolutionary theory. It's hard to even conceptualize biology in any coherent way without putting it into the framework of evolution. Nothing makes sense in the light of evolution, someone once said. I think it was Dostoevsky or Dostoevsky or I don't know, one of those Russian biologist guys.
He is an A-Lincolnist, so he does not believe that Abraham Lincoln existed.
I get accused sometimes of having a strange belief. I don't have a belief. The truth is, I lack belief in Abraham Lincoln. I'm an A-Lincolnist.
Atheists then are people who believe that there are no gods.
I don't know what the Lincoln thing was. Atheist linguist, how you been, my friend? He's a real linguist, by the way. He's got a PhD in linguist stuff. $10 says, is it? Do you have a PhD in? Is it the same atheist linguist? I don't remember. The same person I'm thinking of. Non-Santa Claus believer, a something illegalist. A equals not. Hago saint. Oh, saint. Hagio saint. Nicola saint. Ist believer. Non-Santa Claus believer. A hauntio Santa Claus. Why are you making me do this stuff? God dang it. I'm going to try this, though, because for $10 super chat. A hagio Nicolaist. There you go. There, I did it. Goddess Scummer, 2 pounds. I lack a belief that Steve is right. No, you don't. You know I'm right. Good job on that. You know I'm right. All right, so this is Grand Oppie here, and he has been on my channel. I have spoken with him many times. We've gone back and forth a little bit. I've tagged him on Twitter on things, and he says atheists then are people that believe that there are no gods. Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Now, he doesn't really say, look, you have to accept one or the other, but he has said that if you accept one, you have to kind of accept the other. And I have ran that same argument. Matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, I think I had my WASP argument before I even read Oppie's Companions to Atheism. I think I read that afterwards and found it to support my argument. But neither here nor there. My argument, it does entail a special pleading thing. So it's if, then, else. So it's not just, hey, if you accept one, you need to accept the other on conditions or rationality. It is, if you don't accept the other, it is actually a fallacy, is my argument. So.
Atheists then are people who believe that there are no gods.
Okay, so that last clip is of Graham Oppie, who is recognised as one of the most eloquent and prolific atheist philosophers of our time.
Amazing.
With even the likes of William Lane Craig considering him an absolute powerhouse.
Who do you think is the most formidable atheist today, the most formidable champion of it
I think
today?
without a doubt it's Graham Oppie, your fellow, your compatriot.
Yeah.
He is scary smart. Scary smart.
He really is. And this is what I've been telling people. If you want to learn about atheism, why would you do it from the likes of Matt Dillahunty or Aaron Ra or any member of the atheist, community of Austin or American Atheists? These people are not there to advocate for atheism. They're not there promoting atheism. They're political organizations. Simply put, they are political organizations. They're not there to teach you about philosophy. That is why people like Rationality Rules and Cosmic Skeptic, they never learned philosophy from those groups of people. This is why they've extricated themselves from them. They're like, wait a minute here. These are people that are not putting out information that's in line with the academic literature, right? They're not there for that. Now, if you want to learn atheism, go read Oppie, right? Oppie has some great arguments for atheism, not just, why you shouldn't believe. He argues that, no, God doesn't exist, and here's why. And he has some very good arguments of that. Again, my favorite one is, and I talked to Rationality Rules about this particular argument just recently, and I said, dude, you should do a video on it. And it's called the argument, well, I call it the argument to appealing to theoretical virtues. And it is Graham Oppie's argument, and I think he didn't really name it, but it makes a lot of sense to me. So if you want to learn about atheism, go learn it from the philosophers who write the literature and write the textbooks on philosophy. And I've been saying Oppie is amazing at that. Read Mackey, read Cyril, read Moore, read Draper, read McCormick, I'm trying to think of I read a lot of stuff, so I'm trying to think of the atheist ones. There's a lot of them, so.
And in the prior clip, Oppie certainly seemed to come down hard on defining atheism as the metaphysical proposition that there are no gods. But let me just read a few words from his book titled The Basics of Atheism. Not everyone uses the words atheism or atheist in the way that I do.
Which is correct.
Indeed, Oppie makes it very clear that there are multiple ways that atheism is defined. Yes, he favours the metaphysical definition, which he places into a fourfold distinction, but he doesn't impose his definition on non-philosophical communities, like some theists make out.
Yeah, and that's a very good point. Look, I'm against those theists saying, hey, look, you have to use atheism in the positive sense. That makes no sense to argue that. You could argue, hey, look, the positive case has more utility. You can say it's more in line with the literature because of this. And if you use the negative, there are problems with it, like argument to absurdity because of Rock's been atheist. My WASP argument, my Atheist Semantic Collapse argument, again in the video description, you go read them. Those are arguments to be had, but you cannot say you have to use a word a certain way. That's just wrong. That's what I get accused of, and I've never done that. The people that have been on that side of the fence, the Matt Dillahunties, the Aaron Ra's, the Nat Brodies of the world, have absolutely lied about me for years, saying that I'm the one saying you must use atheism in a prescriptive way as the belief God doesn't exist. I've never argued such a thing, ever. And anybody who's said otherwise, what they've watched is videos of me saying things that they've taken and twisted and done cuts on and taken out of context, and that is dishonest. Kwasi 10,001, 5 a.m. here. This better be good. Well, I hope so. I don't know. I happen to like these reviews, and they get really good positive feedback. So, that's not my phone, Smitty. That's actually letting me know that somebody has done a super chat or subscribed. That's what that noise is. That's not my phone. My phone's actually off. I mean, literally, it's off.
But we get to his fourfold distinction and other definitions in the literature in Chapter 3. First, a bit of groundwork is needed. Contrary to popular belief, words don't inherently have meanings.
I kind of will give him pushback on this. I don't know what the popular belief on that is. Personally, I've never ran across anybody, and I'm not talking about the fruit on the ground, new atheist trademark, just the dumbasses you see out there. I'm not talking about them. But for the most part, I don't see anybody arguing that words have inherent meanings. I've never seen this really. So I don't know why it's commonly held. If you ask anybody that I deal with, none of them are going to argue that words have intrinsic meaning.
They have usages, and it's for this reason that the definition of words change over time. But
yes, they do. But here's where I think that there's some confusion. And I didn't put in the video description, and I will. Go read my essay called By Definition. You can read it on my blog, or you can download the PDF file. It's a little more coherent to read on the PDF because it uses math. But definitions change because it's called synchronic usages. vice diachronic. Diachronic usage is how a word has changed over time etymologically. But synchronic usage is how a word is being used. So when you look at a definition in a dictionary, it's not saying this word must be used this way. It's not defining it prescriptively. What it's telling you is it's describing how the word is being used currently in society. Right? And there's a huge difference. And I think a lot of atheists get that backwards. They see a word and then they see the description and they have it backwards. They see the description and thinks that that is telling you this word must be used that way. That's not how it works. They have it absolutely backwards. So.
Differently, the definitions of words are constructed and regulated by the minds of the people that use them. The word fun, for instance, has an etymology rooted in fon, which is an old word for fool. Hence, it once meant to cheat or hoax. In fact, it still in some senses retains this usage, such as when we make fun of people who use definitions that we don't like. Isn't that right, Dr. Peoples?
Like most people, I was in the unfortunate position of being raised without being able to question belief in Lincoln.
Truly. If this fine doctor isn't the embodiment of exposing the intellectual side of Christianity, then I don't know what is. But to wrap up on the usage of fun, today the word more predominantly has a meaning of having a merry good time, which is vastly different to its original use. To give another example, the word awe originally referred to immediate or active fear, but through religious association it became reverential fear, and now today it expresses the feeling of being humbled. Funny enough, that's funny in the modern sense. The word awful retains the negative sense, whereas the word awesome now has a positive sense. Awesome, right?
Well, yeah, but again, these are descriptive things, right? They're not prescribing usages, and I think that really needs to be really hammered home with atheists out there that say, look, it says atheism is a lack of belief. Well, yeah, that's saying that's how some atheists are using it, period. It's describing. And man, it just trying to explain that to certain atheists or just these ACA parrots is one of the most difficult things in the world. Matter of fact, maybe atheist linguists could write something on it and explain to them. Maybe he could read my essay on by definition and let me know what he thinks on it. But man, it's frustrating when the atheist says, oh, look, the dictionary says this. So what? That's just, again, showing the usages. We know that some atheists use it in that term. We know that. Appealing to a dictionary doesn't give you anything in the argument. Nothing.
And when it comes to the word atheist, the definition has changed nearly as many times as theists have changed their supposed objective.
And that is very true. And that's a great point that Rationality Rules points out. Now, I don't think it's changed much in the last 400 years in my finding of the word. It comes from the French word, and it comes from the Greek word, and there's a word atheos. But I'm not privy to that kind of study, so I'm not really good at that. But when I could find in my own research, aka Google, that the last 400 years it hasn't really changed much. But prior to that, yes, it has. As a matter of fact, the Faithless Pheasant did a brilliant little essay that I put on my blog as him as a guest writer. Explaining that very thing, because Aaron Ra has said that atheism has not changed. It has been it's the only reason it's now be a belief is he thinks that Christians have changed it, and he's absolutely wrong in his belief on that. And Faithless Pheasant just crapped all over him on that.
Morality. To quote Oppie once again, the denial of the existence of gods worshipped in particular places at particular times often attracted charges of atheism, despite the fact that those at whom the charges were leveled believed in other gods.
And that's a very good point too. One has to remember that in philosophy, at least as far as the what's called epistemic status towards something, denial means that you believe it's false. It's not just a rejection. Okay, this is a canonical. In other words, this is generally how it's mostly understood. If you say deny P as a deny proposition, you're not just saying that you're just not accepting it. You're saying that you're holding that the position is false. Matter of fact, you want to get a little more technical. I have a paper that I once found that actually cites that denial means the assertion God does not exist, while disbelief just means that you believe that it's false. And so denial of P is not just a position where you think it's false. It is the active assertion. It has an assertive force to it. This is how I'm reading it on one of the papers that I've had. Again, it's on my blog.
For example, the Romans called early Christians atheists because those Christians denied the existence of the Roman gods. And in the later stages of the empire, many Christians called pagans atheists because those pagans denied the existence of the Christian god.
Yeah, and I found the same thing. Even in the basics of atheism and what Appia said, everything I found absolutely agrees with this. And I've actually said, you know, the term was very heavily used. The Romans calling early Christians atheists because they denied the state-sanctioned Roman pantheon gods, right? I've said this numerous times, and people said, "Oh, Steve, you're just wrong on that. That's stupid." I'm like, okay. So Appy doesn't know what he's talking about, and all these other people that have studied this formally, they don't know what they're talking about. Okay, Godless Scummer, 5 pounds. My favorite atheist response to you on Twitter, quote, "I'm not using philosophy, but basic logic." Kind of read that back to yourself, but slowly situation. I love that, by the way, when people do, I'm not talking about philosophy. I'm talking about logic. Correct me if I'm wrong here, but philosophy is the study of reason, and study of reason incorporates things like logic. So when you're talking about logic, how could it not fall in philosophy? Yeah.
Because of this pejorative use, it might not come as a surprise to learn, that is, if you didn't know this already, that the word atheist predates theist.
And that's another thing I brought up before. The term atheist does predate theist, and people said, I'm wrong on that too. They're like, we wouldn't need a word for atheism if we didn't have the word theist. I'm like, yeah, but atheism came first. Josiah Hansen, hey buddy, just talking about you, but you probably knew that. $2 was pretty happy with RR. Yeah, no, I think these are huge steps. I'm about 80% with him on all this. I think there's 20% that he still, I think, needs to be readdressed and reevaluated, and hopefully, he will in a second video. And by the way, I think that he and I should just have a discussion on this topic. Wouldn't people want to see that? I mean, go tell Rationality Rules that people want to see him and I have a live discussion on this. I would happily do so. Like I said, I've always had cordial conversations with him, and the last conversation I had with him on this particular topic before he made this video, a week or two before I made this video, was outstanding. And I was like, I think I even told him, these are the type of philosophical conversations that I love. Be talking to somebody who is actually studying it and engaging on it, agree or disagree. It doesn't get vitriolic. It doesn't get personal. It doesn't get bitter. I just recently had somebody basically call me a flat earther because they thought my math was wrong. And hashtag it wasn't. That's pretty personal. A friend of mine, I don't know, but Kawasa 5001, don't listen to Godless Scummer. Never trust people who spell things like, quote, honor or with a U, or favor with a U, or color with a U. I knew you were going with that. Yeah. Drop the U, man. Drop the U. It's not about you. It's not about you. Words should not have the letter U in it. It's superfluous and it's weird, and the Queen's English, weird. Be Americanized. I just lost every UK viewer that I had, and every UK Patreon and member that I had. Sorry. I love you guys. By the way, become a member of the channel, please. And a Patreon. It really means something to me. Trust me. You get a little cool green name too. Think about it. And it'll be a green color without the U. So if you become a member, it's green color with no U. It's just COLOR. There you go. All right. Continue on.
Thus, appealing to etymology.
A Trig Feline says, do you trust me? Yes, I do, even though I know nothing about you. Again, I really don't, which is great. But all I know is the Intrigue Feline is amazing at editing, and her skills, or his skills. I call her she, but she's never told me her gender, but I just threw it out there. Feline to me implies gender, but I have no idea. I've really never spoken to her. Yeah, absolutely trust you. So what are you going to do? Now you're scaring me in Tree Feline.
Technology is just not going to cut it, since usage very often couldn't care less about historical context.
That's true.
So let us really hammer this home from the outset.
Hammered.
Anyone who claims that there can only be one specific definition of any word is at best ignorant of linguistics.
Yeah. Well,
and at worst is probably trying to control a narrative.
Hallelujah, praise whatever deity or non-deity you may or may not believe in. I don't care. Absolutely. This, out of the entire video, this is what stood out to me the most. Right here. That's that one statement by him. Because that is exactly what Aaron Ra and Matt Dillon and the rest of those people have been doing, an American Atheist. And I know that Rationality Rules is not a fan of them doing that, and no fan of those organizations at this moment. So this to me is on point. Anybody who says there's only one definition, only one correct definition, I think by fiat, is ignorant of linguistics, ignorant of philosophy, ignorant of epistemology, and trying to control a narrative. Absolutely. This is what I've been saying about Are Ra. This is what I've been saying about American Atheists for how long? Because they're the ones out there saying only, you know.
Flipping the script on its head, it's also important, of course, to appreciate that while we can define words however we please, there's very good reason not to do this. The philosopher Michael Huemer, in his book titled Knowledge, Reality and Value, a mostly common sense guide to philosophy, gives 3 reasons for not doing this, and they are as follows. First, this causes confusion for other people who are familiar with the...
Yeah, I'm just kidding, Feline. I don't give a damn how people spell things. I'm the world's worst speller. Spell it with a U-K, E-T-P-Z. Makes no difference to me.
Ordinary English use of the word. Second, ordinary usage usually serves as important functions. Human beings over the millennia have found certain ways of grouping distinguishing objects, that is, certain conceptual schemes to be useful and interesting. And finally, third, it is actually almost impossible to escape the conceptual scheme that you've learned from your linguistic community. This is all to say that while words don't have intrinsic meanings, they do have common usages.
Absolutely, and they do. And there are atheist groups out there that have the common usage of the negative sense. But I only find that really in America, mostly, especially in like areas in Texas, atheist community of Austin. But overseas, in other countries, their common usage is the positive sense. So I think he's absolutely right here, but I think he is looking a little myopically that, you know, from, you know, a specific, you know, group, which would be the internet atheist, right? Because he's from the UK. So again, most people I know in UK do use it in the positive sense, but he might have personal experiences otherwise. But online, that group, that community of atheists online, yeah, I will admit they tend to use the negative over the positive, right? Yeah, it's perfectly fine with that. But I've also been helping to help educate them, explain why that's probably not the best way to use the word as a usage, and the arguments that go along with that. And again, none of them have assailed my arguments.
While one can redefine a word however they please, such as what Jordan Peterson does when he defines an atheist as essentially a murderer, there's very obvious good reasons not to do this.
Exactly.
What, in your view, would a genuine atheist be like?
He'd be like Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment.
Yeah, see, and I thought that was a really piss-poor answer. I mean, I don't read Dostoevsky. I've never read Crime and Punishment. It's like that thick. I understand the storyline. I did read what the synopsis was. So I'm familiar with that. But, you know, I guess the protagonist, you know, because he doesn't really have a strong moral or ethical theory behind him, he does some pretty shady stuff, including murder. And so he's trying to say, well, an atheist is relating to that, which I think is jumping categories completely. He's gone from atheism being something related to the ontological position of God to more dealing with moral issues, which I think is dishonest. And one of these days, Ozzy's been really busy with stuff, but one of these days I actually like to dive more into that with Ozzy, what Jordan Peterson was trying to get with on that, because I don't think anybody really agrees with him on that, but he's allowed to stipulate usage any way he wants. That's the glory of stipulations and stipulative definitions. We all do that. Look, people have asked me, what's your definition of God? I give them a stipulative definition. If you want to go see what it is, go to Segmentation Fault on Twitter. He has it pinned to his Twitter. I'm not even kidding. He has my definition pinned. And again, that's a stipulative working definition of God, because people always say, well, you can't have a discussion to define God. Okay, well, here you go. What, you've got issues with it? Fine, but at least it works for me. You know? But I think Jordan Peterson really misses the mark there, although he's allowed to do it. The question is, how do you define something? You can define anything you want. I can define atheist as somebody who believes popcorn's good. Whatever. I mean, it doesn't matter. You can pick stipulative definitions are just that, and you can say, okay, let's work with that, or let's not. You know.
Paul-Henri Thierry Baron de Holbach was a French-German philosopher, encyclopedist, writer, and prominent figure in the French Enlightenment.
This part was actually interesting to me. I didn't know he wrote under pseudonym.
Between the 1750s
I did learn this in his video.
and 1780s, he ran the most influential salon in Paris, which was attended by ambassadors, nobles, and famous intellectuals from all over the world, including the likes of Adam Smith, Benjamin Franklin, David Hume, Denis Diderot, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau, with most of them being known for their revolutionary ambitions. To again quote Oppie, the members of the coterie were political radicals with revolutionary agendas. Many, including Holbach himself, were avowed atheists.
Yeah, and that's what I understand too. You know, and again, Holbach was, what was it, 18th century, 17th century, I think it was, give or take. I mean, going back a long time. And he was one of the first to try to talk about atheism in the negative sense, although I think he was somebody who absolutely believed there was no gods, right? Oh, My Finest Journey, $5. Quote, I'm not a puny, wussy, weak atheist. I'm a big, studly, strong atheist. Flex. Yes, you are. And you know, look, people confuse strong and weak with a matter of conviction. And even though they're somewhat related, I mean, if you have a strong conviction, then you'd probably be a strong atheist because you hold more likely that there is no God, right? But strong and weak refers to where you put the negator with respect to the proposition, not specifically the strength of your conviction. You could be a strong atheist, but weakly a strong atheist. So that sounds weird, but you can be like, yeah, I believe there's no gods, but I'm not really highly confident on that, but enough where I hold the belief, but not enough to claim certainty or something along those lines, right? And I think a lot of atheists that argue against theists do better when they do take the strong position, clearly. Because if not, they're not arguing for what I consider to be you know, a propositionally an atheist point of view. They're arguing for Gnosticism, basically.
Unfortunately, the Baron had to publish his works anonymously due to predominantly safety concerns, with the true authorship not becoming common knowledge until many years after his death.
I did not know that.
Within his work, he defended a mechanistic account of nature, maintaining that nature is nothing but matter in motion under mechanical laws, and he also championed a naturalistic view of ethics and politics. In time, I will, most certainly, dedicate a Champions of Reason episode to him.
Yeah, and I knew he was I knew he held to natural moral theory. And look, I tend, if I have to pick a position for moral, when it comes to natural versus non-natural, I do tend to non-natural moral stuff. So, and that's common. I think most people that know about moral theory do tend to moral non-naturalism. But he was a metaphysical naturalist, from what I understand, which is completely different. I'm a methodological naturalist. I don't subscribe to philosophical or ontological naturalism, although I'm not against it. But here's what I've argued before, and people are now realizing that. I've argued this like 5 years ago, I think it was. If you are a philosophical or ontological naturalist, by conditions of rationality, you have to hold there are no gods, because gods fall outside naturalism. And so it's just it's an epistemic entailment. It's not necessarily a logical entailment, obviously. It's not something you can prove logically that you must. I mean, you kind of can in a way if you put it as a syllogism, but I mean, it's not a logical contradiction if you don't. It's an epistemic contradiction. If I say, look, I am a naturalist, but I believe there's a God, there is a epistemic contradiction there to be had, right? So Holbach was, as far as I know, a philosophical naturalist, and he believed that everything was natural, everything was materialistic, which would epistemically entail that he believed there were no gods. Was it 18th century? Thank you, Entry, for your line. 18th century. Okay, I wasn't sure. Yeah, if it was in 1700s, it would be 18th century.
But the reason I bring him up now is to read a few words from his book titled Good Sense Without God. He wrote, all children are born atheists. They have no idea of God. Now, what's really interesting here is that we have one of the first atheist authors explicitly expressing atheism as an epistemic psychological state, as opposed to a metaphysical proposition. Or in other words, de Holbach endorsed lacktheism. See,
this is where I think there's a little confusion there. I think he didn't really necessarily endorse lacktheism. I think that what it was he obviously believed there's no gods, but he was relating. I think Holbach maybe didn't really specify his position very well on this. But let's assume that he was endorsing lacktheism, just arguendo. The same argument can be made that atheists are born theists because they lack a belief that God does not exist, right? It's just the flip side of that proposition. So if you accept babies are atheists because they do not believe God exists, you have to accept atheist or theist because they do not believe God does not exist. It's the same argument. It really is the same argument. We just don't generally ascribe theism to be the lack of belief that God does not exist, because that's generally not how it's used. But if you use it in one way, then it seems to be you must allow the usage of the other way if theists decide to do it that way. Now, I don't think they ever will, but you have to at least allow it, right?
He claims that babies are atheists since they have no conception of the gods. They lack belief in the gods and thus are atheists. Now, does this mean that this is the correct definition of atheism, that we should define it as an epistemic psychological state? No, again, of course not. But this does largely undermine the narrative that lacktheism is some new atheist political scheme to bolster numbers.
Well, no. New atheism, the idea of lack belief has been around for a while. I don't think that's the argument. The new atheists have taken that. I mean, Flew wrote that. In the 1970s, Flew wrote about negative atheism, right? Which is pretty recent in terms of Holbach. I mean, it's 50 years compared to the 1700s. But no, the idea behind the lack of belief or negative case has been around for a while, and I think Rationality Rules confuses that. Is that the political portion of atheism is relatively new. The political movement saying, "Hey, let's take that and make it normative in society and use that for people to understand what we mean by atheism," has been a political push since the 1970s with the presumption of atheism and David Silverman's Fighting God and Dr. George Smith's A Case Against God. These are relatively new things. So when we're talking about new atheism as political movement to bolster numbers, that's not a narrative. That is literally what they have said. Silverman has made that very clear. That was the reason behind that. The editor for American Atheist, Pam Whistle, made that very clear to me that was what they were doing, right? So I think Rationality Rules got this one wrong right here, because it's not a narrative. Literally, atheists have been saying in the movement that is exactly what they're doing. It's for demographics. They want to bolster their numbers because they want power to change political things by getting atheists voted in demographics. That's not a narrative. That is a fact. I mean, by their own words. If you go read their books,
and avoid the burden of proof, etc.
But it is to avoid the burden of proof too. That's not a narrative either. Many of them have said we don't have a burden of proof. It's all on the theist. It is to attempt to avoid the burden of proof. Absolutely is.
Which is a very vacuous interpretation.
I don't think so. I think it's a very important.
Now, let's pause for a moment and take another look at those featured in the compilation at the beginning. Interestingly, all of the theists featured favoured the metaphysical proposition of atheism, that is, the assertion that there are no gods. Whereas, to the contrary, those featured who self-identify as atheists overwhelmingly favour, like de Holbach, the epistemic psychological definition.
Well, be very clear here, that's the ones he showed. I mean, I could give you a poll of people in my live chat and atheists that follow me that do not subscribe to lack-theist usages. They hold to the belief that God does not exist for atheism, and they're not theist. So it's really, it's not an accurate representation of the sample size that he has. To me, a little bit of cherry picking here, and I don't think it was intentional. But theists tend to use it, obviously, because many theists read philosophy more than these lay atheists do. Every one of those people that he quoted for the atheist, I don't think a single one of them probably has ever read a philosophical paper in their lives. Jacqueline Glenn, no. Penn Jillette, probably not. I don't know some of the other ones, but I don't think any of them probably have read any philosophical papers. I think that's why the difference is. You find atheists that read philosophical works, like Charlie Dave out there's a philosopher. He's an atheist. He says there are no gods. He holds to the strong form. So it's based upon his representation of the sample sizes that he has and the ones that he sampled. So I don't think that's a really good indicator of anything. But I'm not a theist. I'm not an atheist either, but I hold to the more philosophical uses because I've demonstrated through argumentation it is more reasonable to have the positive case than the negative, because the negative has many issues that, again, no atheist has ever demonstrated to assail. And Rationality Rules knows these things, and hopefully maybe one day he'll try or admit they're pretty sound argumentations. My WASP argument, he's read my Atheist Semantic Collapse argument, the actual paper that I wrote, not just the small sample that I wrote on my blog, the full paper that some other people have read as well. And I think that he thought it was pretty good. I really think that he actually recognized it is a very formally written paper and very difficult to probably to assail. So, but unfortunately, I can't do a video on that because my paper's not public yet.
That is Lacktheism. I freely admit, of course, that my sample was skewed.
My apologies. My apologies. I forgot that he had said this. Mea culpa. He recognizes his sample size was skewed. I didn't remember him saying that. So my apologies. He recognized it. Good job.
The critics of Lacktheism tend to acknowledge, including myself, by the way, there's almost certainly very good, entirely earnest reasons as to why the vast majority of self-described atheists opt for Lacktheism.
Because they don't know any better is my argument. They don't. First of all, it's only till recently atheists have come to the realization that it isn't just the lack of belief that American Atheism and Atheist Community of Austin and the Atheist Experience has put it out. They fought me for years on this, thinking that, I was making this up, or all these things that you find in Stanford Encyclopedia or Oxford or Cambridge must be somehow skewed by Christianity and skewed by theists. That has been Arn Ra's argument. He argued the exact same thing to Ozymandias. He argued that. He literally argued, well, those definitions have been skewed by Christians, kind of thing. Paraphrase his words, but that's exactly what the argument was that it was influenced by Christians. That's ridiculous.
Now, as someone who, for most of his time as an atheist activist, wholeheartedly favoured Lacktheism, let me try and explain what I think the Lacktheist disposition is. Consider the following two propositions: geocentrism and reincarnation. Further still, let's assume that you knew nothing about these topics. Given this scenario, if someone was to present you with an argument for both of these metaphysical propositions, and you happen not to find any of these arguments convincing, how would you describe yourself in reference to each?
Easy. Agnostic, right? And if you weren't familiar with them, and I'm surprised that I don't know if he's actually read this part from Oppie, but Oppie actually points out that if you're unfamiliar with the proposition, it's not you're atheist toward it or agnostic toward it, you're innocent toward it. So an agnostic has to actually evaluate the proposition. Agnostic says, I've tried to evaluate it, I've suspended judgment on it, and I hold no position either way. A baby doesn't do that. Babies are not agnostic. They're not atheists. They're not theists. They're none of the above. They're called innocent because they're unaware of the proposition. These things only come into play when somebody has been exposed to the proposition to try to evaluate it. So a baby doesn't qualify for atheist, theist, or agnostic. All you know about a baby is that they're not a theist. That much I do think you can argue, right? Because if you argue that God is a theist, or excuse me, babies are theists, there's a pretty heavy bar for you to overcome on that one. Good luck with that. Obviously people will be like, Romans 1:18 says that God, put his name in your heart or whatever. Yeah, well, that's not an argument to me. So, yeah, if you want to think that babies are theists, that's going to be a tough haul to me. But same thing, babies are not atheists either. They're innocent towards the proposition. And so if I was looking at geocentrism and I said, look, I don't have any evidence either way of this. I don't understand physics. I don't understand astronomy. I don't understand any of this. Then, yeah, you're agnostic toward the proposition, right?
And more importantly, what label, if any, would you favour? In the case of geocentrism, would it be correct to say that you affirm the proposition that geocentrism is false? No, it wouldn't.
Of course
not.
In
this scenario, you'd simply not be convinced of the proposition that geocentrism is true. You'd simply lack the conviction, the belief that geocentrism is true.
Right. But and here's where I think the rationality rules may need to ponder this a little bit. For every proposition, there's a negation of the proposition. So if the proposition is that geocentrism is true, the proposition that geocentrism is false is also something you can put in the positive. All propositions are positive, according to Bertrand Russell, because you can put any false proposition in the true sense. So if I say that geocentrism is true, obviously the negation is that the proposition is false, geocentrism is false, but I can make the proposition reworded in the positive sense. Geocentrism is false as a proposition. That is true or false, right? So I can, if I say geocentrism is true, or I can make the proposition geocentrism is false, those are separate propositions. So the negation you can make into a positive thing. So when you say you lack a belief, like for example, lack of belief God exists or lack of belief does not exist, both those are positive positions. Once is expressed in the negative sense. You have the position God exists, you have the position God does not exist, but those are positive affirmations, right? Just because it's negative ontological, right? It's called a negative existential claim. Negative existential claims are still positive claims. If I say, this cup doesn't exist, I'm making a positive statement about a negative existential claim, but obviously it does exist. So when you say that you lack a belief that geocentrism is true, okay, but what's your position on geocentrism is false? Right? If you lack a belief on both, you're agnostic. But if I say geocentrism is false and you say, oh yeah, I believe that's true, then you have a positive assertion and you lack a belief that it's false, right? Or that it's true. So you have to remember that every proposition has two things to it, and both of them are positive. The negative proposition, the negation, still is positive. It just has a negator side in front of it. It's not really like negative numbers, right? Negative numbers are actual negative numbers, but in logic, a proposition, this is the case or this is not a case. This is not a case, it's still a positive proposition. So you have to think about it that way.
If you actually wanted to affirm the proposition that geocentrism is false, you'd need to have arguments to the contrary, and so you'd need to be relatively well read on astronomy and physics. Still, would you really go around telling people that you're agnostic as to whether or not the Earth is the center of the universe?
You could, but I don't know anybody that would. That seems kind of, I mean, again, even like biology, most people believe that evolution is true. Most people believe that geocentrism is false. Why? Because they have a basic understanding of the concepts. You don't have to be an expert to know these things so well that you have to say have a kind of certainty. No, agnosticism does not. Is somebody who just doesn't have a belief either way. If you hold a belief, it doesn't require certainty. It doesn't really require knowledge. It only is a dosastic position. It's only belief. If I say I believe this to be the case, I could know it. I could be certain. But according to Grice's maxioms, when it comes to the relationship of relating to somebody, the amount of quantity and quality and things of that nature, you always want to give them the most amount of information in the least amount of space that relates to your position. So if I say I believe 1 + 1 = 2, I'm kind of flaunting Grice's maxioms, because it's more than just I believe 1 + 1 = 2. I know 1 + 1 = 2. I am certain 1 + 1 = 2. So you want to kind of generally use the language that conveys your actual position. More than, I mean, I understand there's discursive things, and we don't go around saying all the time, "Hey, yeah, I'm certain 1 + 1 = 2." Yeah, whatever. But generally speaking, if you are certain there's no gods, you need to tell somebody that. You don't just say, "I believe that there's no gods." You would be a little bit dishonest by saying, "I believe there's no gods" when you hold the position you're certain there are no gods. You're not wrong, but you're flaunting Grice's maxims in that case, right? Because if you're certain there are no gods, you obviously epistemically believe there are no gods. So.
I wouldn't, at least in an informal setting, I wouldn't. Switching gears, what about the proposition of reincarnation? Would you say that you affirm the proposition that reincarnation is false?
Yes, absolutely I do. I believe reincarnation's BS.
If you would, then all I can really say to you is good luck.
Why?
Since this thesis is essentially unfalsifiable.
Irrelevant. This is where I think, in this part of the video, I think Rationality rules really screw the pooch, no offense. Really screw the pooch, because falsifiability really only deals with scientific theories, and even then, not all scientists agree that should be a condition, right? Karl Popper, thinks that for a strong, robust theory, you need a falsification condition. But unfortunately, there are things out there that are kind of these loopholes to get out of that, and so it really doesn't do much good to have a falsification criteria for the most part. I mean, I think it helps. Don't get me wrong. But it's called confirmation holism, and Rationality rules might want to look into that. Because of confirmation holism, you really can't have true falsificationism, I think, or at least it's very, very difficult. And falsification has nothing to do with your beliefs. Properly based beliefs cannot be falsified, but we have them as ingredients of rationality. I believe external minds exist. Can I demonstrate that? No. Can I prove it? No. But I'm rational to hold that belief as a condition of rationality. Right? Or at least I can say that I'm not irrational. If you want to hold that properly based beliefs are neither rational or irrational, that they're irrational, I'm okay with that. I kind of agree. Properly basic beliefs are irrational because they're not justifiable. And if you hold to classical foundationalism, then you generally hold that properly based beliefs just aren't justified, which is fine. But even still, falsification has nothing to do with it. I believe Stephen, Rationality Rules. I used to call him by his name, but Rationality Rules. I believe that he's an external mind. It's unfalsifiable, but so what? But I believe it. So what? So yeah, I believe that geocentrism is bullshit. So what? I believe that reincarnation, bullshit. So what? I don't have to be able to claim certainty on these things.
You'll almost certainly never be able to affirm that it's false.
What? Why? Well, why? Of course you can. Rationality Rules. You really need to look this part over because you're. I think this was really bad, actually. Of course you can. I can affirm that the thesis that geocentrism is true is false. I can affirm that the thesis that evolutionary theory is false is false. Absolutely. Has nothing to do with falsificationism. Has nothing to do with being certain. Has nothing to do with knowledge. Again, knowledge does not even require certainty in what's called the weak acceptance case condition for knowledge, which is the most commonly held condition for knowledge, which is basically for knowledge. It is obviously justified true belief in this particular case, that you believe it's true, you justify to believe it's true, and the proposition is true. But it's also that knowledge does not require certainty, and knowledge entails belief. That is called the weak acceptance case. The strong acceptance case, which some people have argued, is that knowledge requires certainty. And you usually find those in skeptic readings. When you're reading about skepticism, you'll find certain people that says, look, we hold that knowledge requires certainty. Okay, that's their uses of it, but that's not the most common. And skepticism is the denial that knowledge is acquirable. That's what actually skepticism is in the literature, the usage of it. So when somebody says in philosophical terms that they're a skeptic, they're saying that knowledge is impossible. And there are good arguments for skepticism, or at least interesting arguments for skepticism. I am not a skeptic. I hold that knowledge is acquirable, but if a skeptic could convince me otherwise, I'm down for that. But we're not talking about the Twitter skeptics. We're not talking about those people over there, the atheist community, how they're using the word skeptics. We're talking about actual academic skepticism that deals with Pyrrhonian skepticism, or what's called academic skepticism, which is the position that we can't acquire knowledge, and the Pyrrhonian skeptic says, look, we don't even know if we can acquire knowledge or not. That in itself is not even possible to know. So they're like the true hardcore skeptics. But I think Rationality Rules is really wrong on this, is that we can of course say and affirm with a certain degree of certainty even that the earth is not the center of the universe.
And so, strictly speaking, you should go around saying that you're agnostic about reincarnation.
No, you shouldn't. Stop that. This is where it got painful. This is where it actually kind of hurt me. I like Rationality Rules a lot. He is seriously one of the better people out there talking about this stuff, and I respect the fact he's willing to grow and learn. I hope he does from this, because this is a huge mistake. You should not go around saying you're agnostic unless you have a position either way. If you don't have a position either way, but how many people don't have a position on so many of these things? I have a position on reincarnation. I believe it's BS. That's my position on it. I'm not agnostic on it. I've evaluated what people talk about reincarnation, and I don't think you come back as a butterfly. I just don't, or somebody else. I just don't. I think it's BS. But why would I be agnostic toward that if I've evaluated it and I find that the claim is false? I don't have to say it's falsifiable. I don't have to prove it. I have to demonstrate it. You only have to prove what you claim you can prove. And even then, it's more of a discursory onus, meaning that if I say I can prove to you that 0.99 repeating equals 1, I have a discursory obligation to show you that, right? And if I don't, then you just say, well, you didn't meet your burden of proof that you can show it to me, right? You don't have to be convinced by it. You can say, look, I think your proof is wrong, but I met my burden of proof that I at least can prove it to you. And of course, we know that the mathematical proofs for that are correct, if it is a correct mathematical proof, because it is a truism. It's a true relationship. So yeah, this notion that you should be agnostic about stuff is just nonsense unless you actually do not have a belief either way, which, by the way, Rationality Rules talks about coming up here, which is contrary to what he's putting out here.
But most of us don't do this, do we?
Yes, they do.
Say, no, I don't see reason to believe that reincarnation is true.
Well, but this is, again, violating Grice's maxioms. They're by the way, Grice's maxioms are not prescriptive. He actually came up with them to be descriptive. So you can flaunt them. There are reasons to flaunt those maximums. This is not one of them. You don't say, I don't have a reason to believe that evolutionary theory isn't true. It is, I have evidence evolutionary theory is true. I've looked into evolutionary theory. I've took courses in biology. I've read biology books. I've talked to biologists. I have a fundamentally basic understanding of basic biology and evolutionary theory. I believe that evolutionary theory is true. So I don't say, I don't have a position. I don't have a reason to believe that evolution is false. Atheists need to stop doing that. You don't go around saying, I don't see a reason to believe, I don't see a reason to believe God exists. That's really non-informative. And I don't know if he's just kind of given arguments for the lack position case or the negative case here, or he's playing devil's advocate. If I'm wrong on that, maybe I'm unfairly being critical of him. I don't know. I think he's actually advocating for this. But if I'm wrong on that, then I'm happy to correct myself. But he seems to be saying that, no, I don't see any reason to believe in reincarnation. Is what people are generally saying. No, I know people that say, look, reincarnation is bullshit.
Which is akin to saying that we lack belief in reincarnation.
It is, but if I believe reincarnation is bullshit, then I also lack a belief in reincarnation, right? Because the strong entails the weak. It is a subset of weak.
Now, this is precisely how I used to exclusively look at the proposition of theism, and this is what I strongly suspect is the foundation and reason as to why lack theism is so prevalent.
And I think he's right on that, but that's also why I pointed out why lack theists are just out to lunch on that, I think.
We'll expand upon in Chapter 4. I still think this definition is valid. But since I've had both the interest and opportunity...
And by the way, it is valid. I mean, validity really goes to syllogisms and stuff like that and logic. But, I mean, sure, it's an acceptable usage. I mean, I don't go around saying, look, you can't use it that way. What I say is, okay, fine. If you're going to use the term in the negative connotations, explain to me how you overcome these arguments, like WASP, Atheist Semantic Collapse, Rocks being atheist. How do you overcome these things? And that's where I think a lot of atheists cannot have that conversation. When I had David Smalley on with me in Cheshire, dude was not prepared for that conversation. He was ill-equipped. He didn't understand any of the concepts, and it went south really quick. That happens to almost all these atheist activists out there that are ill-equipped to talk about these topics. Look at Randolph Richardson, who knows crap all about these things. People have read his blog, have come to me, tears in their eyes, crying, with probably decades taken off their life expectancy. How bad it is. It is god-awful to say the least. And yet he thinks he understands these topics. He doesn't. And so what I think happens is that the atheists out there that are on the internet that are promoting these types of things, they're just not well educated on these things. And I think as Rationality Rules gets more learned in these topics, he might see that a little bit more, right?
To digest a decent amount of philosophical literature, I am now more than happy to also affirm the metaphysical proposition of atheism.
Yes, and that's a huge thing here. That's a huge thing, because I remember years ago talking to Rationality Rules about this very topic. And again, he was very cordial, but he wasn't receptive. He wasn't receptive to what I was having to tell him. It kind of went in one ear out the other, even though I showed logic, I showed reason. I don't think at that time he had the skill set he has now. Why? Because he actually wanted to edify himself. He wanted to learn these things. He went to college. I mean, and he read stuff. Wow. Who would have thought that would have been a novel approach to learning about philosophy and atheism? To go to college and learn stuff, or read a book on it, go read a PDF, go study these things, listen to Oppie. I mean, and I'm not even, by the way, this is not me being demeaning to him at all. I am really, honestly happy for him. I am really giving him props for this and giving him a great amount of respect for him doing that. My condemnation is for those other atheists out there that thought that was a bad idea to do that. Right? So I'm certainly not condemning Rationality Rules for that. Absolutely not.
Or at least local atheism. I'm genuinely convinced that naturalism trumps theism both in terms of explanatory virtue and ontological commitment.
And that's fine. And because of that, though, if you hold to the naturalistic thesis, epistemically, you believe there are no gods. And I'm pretty sure the Rationality Rules is somebody who believes there are no gods, right? Which, again, is a little bit epistemically dishonest as far as Grice's maxims to flaunt it that way, to say, look, I believe there are no gods, but I'm going to retreat to merely lack of belief. And by the way, Rationality Rules does point this out poignantly in this video somewhere toward the end, and props to him for that. He calls atheists out for doing that very thing.
But the vast majority of atheists are not happy to affirm this proposition, since they don't, in fact, affirm this proposition.
Well, and again, we call that agnostic on the proposition, but I find that atheists, when they come talk to me, and we kind of suss these things out, I can give them argumentations for atheism. I can put on that atheist hat if I want to. And many of them then feel comfortable. They're like, yeah, you know what? Yeah, there's no gods. Okay. And they say, well, if a theist comes to me and says, how do I justify there's no gods? Well, here you go. Tell them this. And go from there. Atheism that believes there are no gods is completely justifiable. In fact, most of my audience of atheists are atheists who believe there's no gods. They're not this lack of belief people. They're not just saying, I merely lack a belief. I'm not having a position either way. I'm that person. I'm agnostic. I have no belief either way. But my live chat and my subscribers that follow this channel are atheists, the vast majority of them are not agnostic on the proposition. They outright say there are no gods. And I think most of them could probably justify them. Why? Because they've listened to my videos. And I've given them explanations of how to justify. Or they come to me in private, and I have long conversations with them. This is how you would justify it, and I explain to them logical problem evil, evidential problem evil, divine hiddenness, liar's paradox, obvious, appeal to theoretical virtues. And you just you run an argument probabilistically like that. And that I think is perfectly fine, because a belief is something you can put in probability in some ways, right? Do I think it's something you can put in an exact quantifiable way? No, obviously. I don't think we can say, oh, I have 0.7624, percent belief in something. No, it's not quantifiable in that way. But I think that we say, look, if we believe over a certain amount, fuzzy logic, then we are convinced. If I told you, look, I am 99.999999999999999% confident that 1 + 1 = 2. Okay, for all practical purposes, we're going to call that certainty. It's well within, even for discovery of particles, only 5 sigma, right? Which is 0.9999997 or something, if I remember correctly. Whatever the hell it is, it's still pretty high confidence level. At that point, your confidence level is so high, it would be irrational to say that you don't hold the belief. If I told you that, hey, look, your chance of winning the lottery tomorrow or is 99999999999 to 1, you have the belief that you're not going to win probably. But of course, there is something called the lottery paradox, which is an interesting paradox, by the way. But yeah, there is a percentage and probability aspect to beliefs, and I agree with Richard Carrier on that. I think he takes it too far. All right, Lord Brian says, except me and Craig Reed, TCR. Shout out to the deist and Christian theist in here. Are there? I don't get a lot of theists watching my stuff, and I don't know why. If you guys could help promote me among the theist communities, I'd be really appreciative of that. Because those are people I want to have talks to, as much as I do with atheists. Bert Toast or BG Toast says, please do a stream about liar's paradox. I just saw a video on answers and reason. My brain still hurts and lost as AF. Oh yeah, I can do it. It's been a while since I've looked into the liar's paradox. It's been a year or two. It's not just a grand liar's paradox. In this particular case, it's actually an argument called, and I don't remember the guy who wrote the paper on it. I think he was in college when he wrote it, but it was called God's liar. What was it called? It was a special. It was a form of the liar's paradox. What was it called? The divine liar's paradox. That's what it was. Divine liar's paradox. So it's been a while since I've looked at the divine liar's paradox, but I will look into it again. But the liar's paradox, yeah, I could probably do something on that. Atheist Language says, I like to put it along the lines, the probability of any deity existing is at least negligible, if not infinitesimal. Yeah, I mean, look, if somebody says that the chances of a God existing is negligible, then of course, then you have every right to say you believe there's no God. I mean, Bertrand Russell called these things bare possibilities. He said, if we accept that there's bare possibilities that we all believe, or even, a kind of agnostic to, then it bloats our ontology. And what he means by that is, again, I might be paraphrasing, but but what he means by this is that we accept just because something is possible doesn't mean we should believe it. Obviously, right? It is metaphysically possible for pigs to fly out of my ass right now and spit gold coins. It is metaphysically possible. Is it nomonologically possible? No. Is it logically possible? Yes. But there's different types of logics. right? There's a very distinct difference between logically possible, metaphysically possible, and nomologically possible. Those are completely different things. Now, there are some interrelations, right? If something is logically impossible, I hold it as also metaphysically impossible, right? So if it's the logically impossible thing of a contradiction of X equals not X, I also believe is a metaphysical contradiction as well. You cannot have something that is not itself. So there is a relationship there. Oh, it's butter toast, by the way. I'm sorry. Butter toast. Well, it could have been burnt, but it's butter toast. I should have known that by now. Sorry about that, butter toast. So, Intrigue Feeling says 5 sigma, a p-value. 99, yeah, it's something like 99.99994% or something. A p-value, you know, normally is 0.5%, 0.5, right? Percent or something, 0.5. But if you have a sigma of 5, I mean, for Pete's sake, I mean that's a confidence level. Well, I shouldn't use the term confidence level because that means a different thing in statistics. But if you have a sigma of that much ability to say, look, we have discovered a particle, then that's all that's qualified. You know, all that you need to have a confidence of that. But a p-value is actually, you know, what you would have to reject the null hypothesis. Again, I hate statistics. I'm not a big fan of it. I had to learn statistics, but I'm not a fan of stats.
Just as they don't, strictly speaking, affirm the proposition that reincarnation is false.
Well, why not? Hey, okay, how many people out there in the live chat believe reincarnation is false? If you do, press 1. If you don't, if you believe it's true, if you believe reincarnation is false, press 1. If you believe it's true, press 2. If you're agnostic, press 3. There you go.
They simply are not convinced by the various arguments in favor of theism, and they are also not interested in affirming the opposition.
Well, why not? Well, I mean, it may not be interesting, but that might be for discursory reasons, right? There might be people out there saying, look, I believe there's no gods, but I want to get in a conversation as to why. You have no onus to tell anybody why you believe there are no gods, unless you want to have a discussion with them. It's called the burden of persuasion if you want to actually convince them. Then you have an onus to provide your evidence. But again, these are discursory burdens more than anything else. There's no metaphysical burden to say, look, I believe that reincarnation is bullshit. I don't have to show you anything. I don't have to even talk to you about the topic if I don't want to. But if I wanted to persuade you that there is no such thing as reincarnation, then I need to give you argumentation for it. Right?
To put it bluntly, they don't care about God, and who can blame them? Most theists don't care to defend the proposition that reincarnation, astrology, or chakras are false. And
that's true, but a lot of them do. I mean, look, I argue that astrology is complete bumpkiss, right? And there are a lot of people out there that do videos explaining astrology as bumpkiss. They do want to. They may or may not be atheism, or some atheist, unrelated. And so an atheist can say, look, yeah, astrology is bumpkiss, but I don't want to have the conversation with you about it. Nothing wrong with that.
So to expect and often demand that lack theists defend a position that they don't actually hold is absurd.
Well, agreed. But most lack theists, I think, are playing hide the ball, as Ozzy points out, that they are people that believe there are no gods. But again, when you tell them, okay, fine, you don't have a position either way, that is called agnostic on the proposition in philosophy, they lose their shit. And I'm like, look, I'm not calling you an agnostic. Agnostic's a label. I'm saying in the literature, your position is referred to as this. So if I went to go read a paper and it says agnostic on proposition or agnostic on God's existence, that's this position you have. If you're a lack theist and you merely lack a belief either way, you have the position that in the literature is referred to agnostic on the proposition. That's a fact. That's not me labeling anything. That's not me pulling anything out of my ass. That's just how the literature describes that position.
Like Isaac Asimov, most atheists, as in lack theists, would say, I don't have the evidence to prove that God doesn't exist, but I so strongly suspect that he doesn't that I don't want to waste my time.
Yeah, and that's fine, but Isaac Asimov wasn't really a philosopher. I think he had a degree in chemistry, if I'm not mistaken. And I love Isaac Asimov. But so what? You don't have to prove anything. None of this requires to prove anything. I can have a belief without proving it. I can only have to prove what I can say that I can prove. If I can prove to you something and I say, look, I can give you a proof for this, then I have to prove something. But if I say God doesn't exist, I don't have to prove anything to anybody. Right? But I don't hold that position. But if you say, I strongly suspect that he doesn't, but I don't want to waste my time, that's just apatheism. Right? And you could be somebody who believes there are no gods and apatheistic. I'm an apatheist agnostic. I've been saying that for years now. I took off the partial theological and cognitivists because I've subsequently have moved on from them. I think that theological cognitivism doesn't really, it leads to problems, right? So I do think that there is coherency in the terms being used, but I used to say that I was a apatheistic, agnostic, kind of a partial theological non-cognitivist. I kind of tend to, what are we talking about? But I've moved on since then. But I am theistic in that I'm an agnostic, and I don't care to talk about if God exists or not. It's not something I really have an interest in. Would I like to know one way or another? Sure. I'm not apatheistic about if God's going to reveal himself to me. I'm not an apatheist. I'm apatheistic towards the dialogue. It gets nowhere. So I don't want to waste my time with that either. So, yeah, but that's not atheism. That's apatheism.
Given this, I think it's very easy to see why most atheists favour the epistemic psychological definition of atheism. Now, one might have issues with this definition, as many, including myself, do, but this isn't the place nor time to delve into them. Rather, the point here is to simply explain why most atheists favour lacktheism.
And that's perfectly fine. But as he points out, they may favour it because I think that they're vastly uneducated on these topics, and by their own wanting to be uneducated. I have yet to find a lacktheist that has ever read a paper on these topics in their lives. Matter of fact, Rationality Rules and Cosmic Skeptic, before they went to college and they believed these things, probably really didn't read as much as they do now about these topics. I would be hard-pressed to think that they did. At least to this degree, right? I mean, now they're becoming more formally educated. They're like, oh, yeah. I can see the problems with these definitions. And like I said, he's read my Atheist Semantic Collapse argument. He hasn't assailed it. I don't think he's even going to try. And even my WASP argument, which is very, very simple, nobody's assailed that.
Given this framework, we can then expand into such categories as weak atheism and strong atheism, with a weak atheist being someone who just isn't convinced of theism, and a strong atheist being one who affirms the negation of theism. Again, whether you prefer this definition or not doesn't really matter. What matters is that it's a robust framework that most self-described atheists favour.
Well, and he goes into to point this out, it's also a robust framework that theists could use, right? If it works for atheists, it works for theists. A theist just doesn't believe that God doesn't exist, right? But I think most theists will recognize by doing that, there's some huge issues with that. So yes, you can have positive and negative atheism, but by doing so, I don't see how you can get out of the atheist semantic collapse argument. It logically proves that these words become devalued. They have no differences between the two, or the three actually. Weak atheism, and I proved this in a proof before, that weak atheism, weak theism, and agnosticism, if you accept the weak conditions, all mean the same thing. There's no identifiable distinctions between any of them, logically speaking. Epistemically speaking is a different story, and I had somebody who really dived into my work, and he wrote a PDF criticizing my argument. Although he said logically I'm absolutely correct, but he said there's epistemic differences, and I finally had to explain to him. But I've known that all along. I've never argued otherwise, the epistemic differences, and he kind of like stopped working on his paper to refute me, because at that point I was like, well, you're arguing something I'm not arguing, right? I'm well aware that there's epistemic differences, but logically speaking, they all collapse in the same thing.
In philosophy, at least, atheism should be construed as the proposition that God does not exist.
That's from the Stanford Encyclopedia. That's Dr. Draper's
the proposition that there are no gods. This quote is from Paul Draper's Stanford Encyclopedia article titled Atheism and Agnosticism. Atheism is the view that there is no God. Agnosticism is traditionally characterized as neither believing that God exists nor believing that God does not exist. This quote is from Matt McCormick's Internet Encyclopedia article titled Atheism.
Yeah, and also on the Internet Encyclopedia, people only read the first line on that, and they always say atheism is a, I don't know where it says atheism is a lack of belief in God, or it's a negative stuff. But they don't realize is that that's just being descriptive, because if atheism is a belief that God does not exist, it also entails a lack of belief. And I think that McCormick probably should have been a little more precise in his wording of that, but whatever.
Are agnostics atheists? No. An atheist, like a Christian, holds that we can know whether or not there is a God. The Christian holds that we know that there is a God, the atheist that we can know that there is not. The agnostic suspends judgment, saying that there are not sufficient grounds either for affirmation or denial.
Yeah, and again, I think Russell was in his time period. I don't agree with Russell on this, by the way, but I mean, I understand what his time period was, and I think that you have to look at it in the context of his time period. An atheist that we can know that there's a God, there is not. An atheist doesn't necessarily say that. An atheist can say, look, I believe there are no gods, but I'm not claiming the ability of it, right? Most atheists I deal with don't go around saying, I know there are no gods. Now, there are some. I do see, people saying, look, gods are impossible. I know there's no gods exist. So they do exist, those people that exist. But when you actually try to have them give you their argumentation, most of them fall flat. Most of them are not really good arguments against a god. If you want to, you can say, if you say there are no gods, okay, fine, and maybe it's justifiable, but at least give me a theory of knowledge to make it so. They can't even get that far. And when you say a god is impossible, like Aaron Ross says gods are impossible, but any philosopher who's asked him why they are impossible, I'm not even kidding, he cites a dictionary. Argumentium ad dictionarium kind of thing. He actually cites a dictionary to argue that gods are impossible by using a dictionary. No, the stupid level on that is simply off the charts. If you argue something is impossible, you need a proof by impossibility. You need an argumentium ad deduction, like a reductio ad absurdum. You need a logical proof, modus tollens or something, to prove gods are not possible. You have to show that they cannot exist in any possible world. That's what impossible is understood in philosophy. It means that it cannot exist in any possible world. It's a metaphysical thing. So when you say gods are impossible, you need to show metaphysically that they're impossible by an actual proof, not by citing a dictionary. A dictionary is nothing. That's just... I hate to say it, but when Aaron Ross cites a dictionary as proof of something like that, it literally to me puts him in a young earth creationism mindset. It is that bad, or a flat earth mindset. It's that bad of argumentation style. And people have told him he needs to stop doing it, but he just won't.
And this quote is from Bertrand Russell's essay titled, What is an Agnostic?
It's a good paper.
Now, all three of these wonderful people are highly respected philosophers who also happen to be self-described atheists. Add to this list Oppie, Alex Malpass, and Ozymandias, who...
And I have respect for all those three people. People know that I do communicate with all three. Well, it used to be very regularly. I mean, I haven't talked to Malpass in quite some time, but he's, a member of the Great Debate community. Alex just kind of like stopped talking about it. I don't know why. I'm always not mad at me or anything, but maybe he's just doing his old thing. But we used to communicate frequently, and I have the utmost respect for Alex Malpass. He really has a brilliant way of describing things. Last time I talked to him was when he did his debate with William Lane Craig. I had reached out to him because I was like, dude, I don't even understand what the hell you guys were arguing about. Can you help me out? Because I kind of want to break it down or see if I can. And he explained to me the argument. Took me a couple days to digest it, and I wrote a blog on it. Not my best piece. I got about 80% there. I think there's 20% I probably could have done a little bit differently, but nothing so wrong. But he read it and he didn't see really any major issues with it. But it was very complicated, and he was nice enough to just say, "Look, this is what William Lane Craig is saying about what's called a future perfect tense as comparative to a simple tense." But it really, really was very complicated stuff. And obviously, people know I'm a huge fan of Ozzy, and I think Oppie are the best contemporary philosopher of our time in this particular topic. I mean, bar none. Huge fan of Oppie.
Who also happen to be atheist philosophers, and we are confronted by another interesting observation. Why is it that most atheist philosophers opt for the metaphysical proposition that there are no gods, as opposed to the epistemic psychological definition? Well, Draper does a very good job of breaking down some of these reasons in his Stanford Encyclopedia article, as does Oppie when presenting his fourfold distinction of theists, atheists, agnostics, and innocents, which I'm more than happy to dedicate an entire video to, should enough of you be interested.
I totally forgot
I might
he
even be able to
mentioned
get Oppie in on the script, which, let's face it, would be bloody awesome. And that's awesome in the sense of reverential fear. Anyhow, my purpose here isn't to present a forceful case for or against either of the popular definitions of atheism. Rather, my purpose is to sufficiently explain why each definition tends to be favoured by certain communities. Hopefully, I've already achieved this with the epistemic definition in the prior chapter.
Yeah, and I understand what Rationality was drilling this, but you know what it was? I think that the categories are wrong that he's using. I think the categories are, why are the educated people using the more formal definitions, and why are the lay people who have never read a paper in their lives using the informal or the colloquial, the general parlance ones? That, I think, is a much greater discussion to be had. And then why do the more educated people use these types of usages, and why cannot the lay atheist overcome the arguments against the use of the lay atheism definitions? Again, they're fine to use it, but unfortunately none of them have ever given me reasons why that it is better than the philosophical usage, except obviously for demographics. I get that as a utilitarian argument. I'm not a utilitarianist. I don't subscribe to utilitarianism. I think it's one of the worst moral theories out there. I mean, there might be reasons sometimes to subscribe to it, and appeal to it at least. I think you can appeal to any moral theory. I don't think you're locked into any one moral theory. I do tend to more value pluralism than anything else nowadays. I think that if you want to look into moral theory, go check out Joe from Answering the Reason and Trolley Dave's. They have a brilliant video on moral pluralism, and when I watched it, as somebody who has had a fondness for moral pluralism, I'm like, oh my God, somebody actually gets it. I was like blown away. I was like, yay, because I think that there's reasons to have a more pluralistic approach to moral theory, but the point is that the lay atheist will give very poor reasoning for why they tend to lack theism, and a lot of them even deny it to be utilitarianism or appeal to utility or demographics or political things, which is odd because even Rationality Rules kind of put it as a narrative. No, the mainstream atheists that have been pushing this fully admit it's for political power. Again, he can reach out to Pam Russell from the American Atheist. She absolutely says for political reasons.
And I'll now equally attempt to do the same for the metaphysical definition. Consider this quote from Oppie, taken from a companion of atheism and philosophy. If we accept that there is this distinction between strong atheism and weak atheism, we should surely accept that there is a similar distinction between strong theism and weak theism. Strong theists reject the claim that there are no gods, while weak theists merely refrain from accepting the claim that there are no gods. And then we shall have it that agnostics are both weak atheists and weak theists.
Now, I don't know if he read this before I sent him this. I actually sent him this particular thing a couple weeks ago before he made this video, because I used this quote in my semantic collapse argument, or a quote from that paper, or the source that he's citing. So I don't know if he got it on his own, but yeah, I cite Oppie as well in my work. And by the way, Rationality Rules appreciated that. He actually appreciated the fact that my very first thing on my paper is a quote from Oppie that I go into talk about. So yeah, he's a huge Oppie fan as well. But you know what's funny is I've been talking about this stuff for long before Rationality Rules was. Do I get credit for that? No. I mean, yeah, he shouted me out. I'm not talking about Rationality Rules, but does any other mainstream atheist out there give me any credit for promoting the same thing now that I've been talking about for years, that people said I was wrong on, and that has, by the way, led to 5 years of harassment of me and my friends, 5 years of gang stalking and trolling of me and my friends, merely because I explained to these people concepts that they thought were wrong, and I'm not even fronting, haunted us ever since. Do I get any recognition from that from the atheist activists out there? None. Absolutely freaking none. But I mean, I'm not talking about Rationality Rules, by the way, because he was nice enough to shout me out at the beginning, and I appreciate that. Thank you, sir.
This is but one of many objections levelled at the epistemic psychological definition of atheism. Another is the reductio that it entails that rocks must be atheists, since they too lack a belief in the gods. And yet another objection refers to the strong arguments we have in favour of there being no gods, or at least no omni-attributed God.
Yeah, logical.
If atheism is defined as an epistemic state, then it's not correct to say that these arguments are in favour of atheism, is it?
And also, if you define atheism as a psychological state, it can either be true or false, right? Because it's not propositional, which I think is ridiculous, right? You want to be able to say atheism is true or atheism is false just as much as you would theism is true or false, right? You can't go around saying, look, a theist says atheism is true, and then say, well, atheism is a non-propositional. That makes no sense. You cannot have theism as a proposition and then want to go around and argue that atheism is not propositional. Now, he gets into the agnostic front of that, and I'll explain why you don't want agnosticism as propositional.
Now, there are ways to respond to these objections. For instance, for the rock objection, we could say that in order for one to lack a belief in a proposition, one must have the possibility to believe in the proposition, which rocks don't.
The problem with this is that what Rationality fails to realize is that you cannot limit the scope like that, because if you look at the logic, and I can send Rationality the rules of logic on this, I mean, it's in my blog, you either have theist or not theist. And if you semantically substitute non-theist with atheist, you have a strict dichotomy of theist and atheist, period. It doesn't matter what your scope is at that point. You cannot limit the scope to things that just have cognitive thought or the ability to think and reason. It plays nothing into the set theory. So the logic itself of a set theory, in a universal set, you have a set and then you have the set prime, A prime. Set, and then the things that are not in that set. Every set has that in a universal set. If you have a set, then you automatically have a set that's complementary to that, which is not everything in the set. So the set of, for example, integers. There's a complementary set, which is the set of every other number that's not an integer, right? So if you have a set that's theist, you have the set that's non-theist. Everything that's not a theist. A rock is a non-theist. And we're not talking about epistemically. We're talking about in the category of things that don't believe that God exists. It is an automatic set that has to exist if you have the set of theist. Then anything that's not a theist would be a non-theist. Okay, we're not talking about a label. We're talking about in the category of things that are not theist. We're just going to call that not theist or non-theism. It doesn't have to have a belief for that. It is a set that's basically contingent upon not existing in the set of things that are theist. So if I relabel non-theist as atheist, if I just say, okay, I'm going to change this as a semantic substitution, now I have a strict dichotomy of all things in the universal set that exist. All things must be theist or atheist, which includes rocks. This is something that is logically provable. I have shown this on my blog as a logical argument. So just by limiting the scope to things that just have a position doesn't assail that argument.
Since they lack the necessary cognitive apparatus. But again, my purpose here isn't to defend either position. I don't necessarily endorse any of the objections or responses I've just given. All I'm aiming to achieve here is to illustrate why, in a nutshell, different communities favor different definitions.
Because some communities are politically motivated and they want to keep people uneducated.
Now, it would be somewhat remiss of me, as I think it's somewhat remiss of others, not to acknowledge that the claim that none of the philosophical literature defines atheism in the lacktheism sense is, I love to break it to you, simply false. Yes, most of the literature, at least as much as I've read, endorses the metaphysical definition of atheism. But as Draper informs us, there are indeed philosophers and philosophical dictionaries that favor defining atheism as a psychological state.
Absolutely right. Yeah, and the Oxford Handbook of Atheism is only one chapter in there that I could really find that favors it. It's the very first chapter. I've read this book. It's by Stephen Bullivant, who is a theist, who appeals to etymological roots and utility of the word as a universal umbrella, much the way Flew did. But Oppie also wrote in this handbook as well. Oppie actually shows, again, why we shouldn't do that, right? So this Handbook of Atheism has pros and cons, right? I mean, it does, the very beginning of it, yes, Bullivant, who is the editor of this book, prefers that, but that's not really normative, and there's other chapters in that book that refute Stephen Bullivant, or at least argue against Stephen Bullivant.
Which is the Oxford Handbook on Atheism. Further still, the philosopher Stephen Bullivant defends the psychological definition on grounds of its utility, arguing that it best serves as an umbrella term for many subcategories.
And from etymological roots, which Stephen points out later on, is a very poor way to argue for atheism. So Stephen Bullivant does both. He does it from utility and he does it from etymological roots. And I think that, like I said, Rationality Rules agrees, you don't want to argue atheism from etymological roots. You're just going up the wrong tree there.
Atheism, such as strong and weak atheism. So, while it's true that most of the philosophical literature favors the metaphysical definition, there is a respectful segment that doesn't. Finally, I just want to gently touch upon agnosticism. Many critics of the lack-theism position hit hard on the fact that a psychological state isn't a proposition, and yet they almost always accept the definition of an agnostic as someone who isn't convinced that there is at least one God, but also isn't convinced that there is not at least one God.
Yes.
Which is, indeed, a psychological state.
Yes, absolutely right. And here's where I think Rationality rules may have missed the mark. The reason why atheism is a psychological state, right, is because, obviously, one, it is the non-belief of either the proposition true or nor the proposition being false. But one, a proposition is something that can be testable. There's nothing we're testing for in agnosticism, right? You can test to see if a God, test by argumentation, not by science, but test by argumentation, and argue whether God exists or not. Agnosticism is not propositional because we're not basing it upon the proposition of God existing or not. Right? Now, there is an epistemological proposition of agnosticism. That is dealing with the knowability of gods, but that's in a different domain of discourse. That's in the epistemological domain, not in the ontological domain. So we're not talking about that. And so we don't want agnosticism to be propositional, because then an agnostic is somebody who believes that the proposition of agnosticism is true or false, which deals with the knowability of gods, which is not applicable in the ontological domain. And as Draper points out, it destroys any usage of the term agnostic to describe somebody who neither believes either proposition. So that's why agnosticism is a psychological state. And Draper points this out in SEP, why we don't want agnosticism to be propositional.
Funny enough, when Thomas Huxley introduced the term agnostic, he didn't assign it to an epistemic psychological state, but today pretty much everyone uses it in this way.
That's true. When Huxley came up with it, it was more of what's called an epistemic normative principle. It was very similar to scientific methodology. It was basically we shouldn't believe anything without scientific grounding for it. And I think it kind of touched on logical positivism as well. But that was, 100 some odd years ago, right? So his usage is archaic. Do I think that agnosticism as a psychological use is in line with his usages? Yes, absolutely. Matter of fact, Draper points that as well. I don't think Huxley would have had any issue with agnosticism being a psychological state of neither believing God exists or neither believing God does not exist. Why? Because he thought theists and atheists were both missing the mark. He felt theists and atheists were not justified to claim their positions, which would mean that he held neither position. He didn't believe either way. But he grounded that on scientific reasoning. That was his normative epistemic principle. So again, you have to differentiate the term agnosticism because there's multiple different uses for it. And again, go read my blog on agnosticism 3 ways. I point this out. I also did a video on it called Agnosticism 3 Ways. If you want to go look it up after this video, go watch my video it's Agnosticism 3 Ways. It was a standalone video where I kind of explained my blog. But yes, Thomas Henry Huxley used it differently. So why? What does it matter? We don't go by how he used it. We go by in the literature in modernity, in modern days. And I think it's perfectly in line with Huxley's approach. And again, Draper points that out.
So what I'm getting at here is that when people try to dismiss lack-theism on account of it not being a metaphysical proposition, it's worth asking them how they define an agnostic.
Yeah, and I think that's perfectly fine to do. But the problem is that when I was telling people this is how agnosticism is normatively held in the literature, I got mocked. I got ridiculed. I got literally branded like a heretic and an apostate or whatever. I was never in there. Well, I'm familiar with the atheist community, but they shunned me. All the people on the line, every one of them I've had issues with just about. So I was branded somebody who didn't know what they were talking about. Arn and Matt Dillahunty, all of them had, basically, treated me like a pariah. And this is one of the reasons why I got along with some of the other activists that didn't. Like David Silverman, I never had an issue with David Silverman. Why? Because he never treated me that way. I got treated better by David Silverman, and people can talk all the shit they want about him, but I got treated better by him, at least, on these topics than I ever did by Matt Dillahunty. And he used to be he is still a firebrand atheist. David Silverman is a firebrand. But he never made it personal with me. He never shat on me for telling him that I think he had made some errors in reason and stuff like that.
In addition to words having usages, they often have, within different communities and contexts, multiple usages. Perhaps the most relevant example of this, that I'm sure we're all aware of, is the word theory. I've genuinely lost count of how many times I've seen creationists dismiss evolution by natural selection on account of it being just a theory. Which, of course, is an obvious equivocation.
Absolutely right.
The word theory is used very differently in the scientific literature compared to the everyday informal use of the word.
Right.
Or as the American Museum of Natural History expresses the distinction, in everyday use, the word theory often means an untested hunch or a guess without supporting evidence.
Agreed.
But for scientists, a theory has nearly the opposite meaning. A theory is a well-substantiated explanation of an aspect of the natural world that can incorporate laws, hypotheses, and facts.
And I really like that usage. I have my own stipulative usage of the word theory. I mean, I think I glean most of it off the internet, but my usage of, when I say theory in science, I put it as a well-substantiated body of evidence that has explanatory power for natural observations to give natural explanations to natural phenomenon, and has repeatability, right? Yeah. That's a theory. A theory has been confirmed in science. It means it's been tested. It has been confirmed to be the case. Doesn't mean certitude, right? It's not saying, hey, look, we're certain about this, but we're saying that, hey, this theory makes predictive modeling that has given us results. It has utility to it. And so, yes, when we say a model is confirmed, we're not talking about certainty. We're saying that it has been tested enough to test the veracity of it that it can make successful predictions. That's what they mean by a confirmed scientific model, which is a scientific theory.
Now, just as it's perfectly fine that there are two popular definitions of the word theory, I see no issue whatsoever with there being two popular definitions of the word atheism.
And this is where I kind of had to pause myself. I'm like, okay, but you don't like it when young earth creationists go around saying theory is just a guess, right? Because there is an equivocation issue there, right? Now, sure, when we talk about theory in a colloquial sense, I can tell somebody, hey, look, I got a theory about what's going on about this. And I don't mean a confirmed model. It's a different connotation. And I'm having a discourse with somebody, people would understand my usage is not, connoting the position that I have a confirmed model, clearly. And I think something's the same thing here. Young earth creationists equivocate these things, sure. But it's also what domain of discourse you're talking about. And I think that Lactheists, they're still talking about philosophy, even though they don't want to. So when we're talking about the word atheist, it still makes more sense to use the positive because you're talking about atheism. Just like if younger creationists are talking about science and they say, evolution is just a theory, they're talking about science and they're equivocating. So I see a little bit of an issue by pointing out that younger creationists do this, but not having the same issue that Lactheists use.
Just as the word theory is used both in a scientific and colloquial everyday sense, the word atheism is used in a philosophical and colloquial psychological sense. Hence, so long as people clarify what they mean by their language, I really don't see a problem.
And I agree with that too. There should be clarification. Smitty says David Silverman wanted to have the conversation that was his whole shtick. How good of his end of the conversation was another matter. And look, Dave has told me he will not contest me on this. David knows that I will shit on him hard in philosophy, on atheism and agnosticism and all this stuff, and he doesn't want to. I will say that Dave Silverman, being the firebrand atheist he is happy to have discussions with atheists. We're happy to have discussions with theists and talk about how there's no God or whatever. But he's scared to death to talk to me about this particular topic because I think he's learned over the years maybe there needs to be some refinements in the positions he had before, and he just doesn't want to deal with those things. And I'm okay with that. It's like whatever. He's gotten into some other things. He's in more politics now and other things. So I can see why he doesn't want to revisit that, but I think he's acknowledged that I wasn't wrong that in my things that I promoted for over the years on that.
What is a problem is when people force their preferred definition on others.
Yes,
be it theists who favour the metaphysical definition, mocking and grandstanding atheists who are just not convinced by any of the arguments for a god's existence.
And I guess
atheists
do that,
who prefer the psychological definition, insisting that self-described agnostics are atheists. Because Yes, they are atheists according to this usage, but according to the metaphysical usage, they're not. And if they prefer the metaphysical usage, then so be it.
Right. And I appreciate that. Look, when I have an atheist tell me somebody that tells me that I'm an atheist, I just chalk them up as somebody who doesn't know what they're talking about and not worth having a discussion on. They're not at that level yet. And this is not me being, braggadocious. This is not me being elitist. This is not me being arrogant or smug or narcissistic. It's none of that. It has nothing to do with any of that. This is my reason, and it's pure and simple. It's pragmatism. It's like John Dewey's pragmatism. Why am I going to spend my time for somebody who has not even bothered to even read the most basic stuff on this stuff, who's only parroting stuff I've heard a million times before from the atheist experience, people? Why am I going to have a discussion with them? Why am I going to waste my time with them? Just like Isaac Asimov said, why would I waste my time with that? That's the reason why I say, look, you're not up to this level to have the discussion. It's not saying that I'm up here. It's not saying that I know more than anybody else. It has nothing to do with that. It is a pragmatic approach of, look, you're not even at the frickin' square one to even engage with me on this. And I know it comes across as demeaning and talked down to. I get that. I do understand that. I'm well aware of that. But it's only because I don't want to waste my time with those people. Look, if I knew nothing about basic physics, and I go to a physicist and I go, say something really stupid like, force is a measurement of unit area. Well, no, it's not. Force is dependent upon unit area, but it's not the same thing. I mean, if I make some really stupid remark about physics, gravity, is I don't know what's some gravity is the force of down. The theory of down describes gravity. I don't know, it's something stupid. I'm not at a level to discuss it with a physicist, I think, right? If I say 1 + 1 = 3 and I'm talking to a mathematician, they're going to tell me to go away, right? They're not going to sit there and even begin to have a discussion with me unless they want to try to convince me otherwise, which if I'm so... If my mindset is such that I really believe 1 + 1 = 3, and I'm talking about for the reals, I'm not talking about Gawa theory or in a different field for the mathematicians out there, but in the field of the reals, then obviously 1 + 1 does not equal 3, right? So, anyways. Let's see if we can get through the rest of this.
And another problem, which I simply have to call out from my own camp, is when atheists say such things as there are no gods and religion is made up nonsense, which are metaphysical statements, but then, when pushed, retreat to the lack-theist position.
And I respect him for that.
If you're going to say that God doesn't exist, you've got to stick with the metaphysical definition.
And I think he's right in that. I think that these people that say, look, I think all gods are BS. I'm a naturalist. There's no such thing as supernatural. But I'm not making the claim there are no gods. They're being inconsistent with themselves. Right? They're being inconsistent because if you hold methodological naturalism, epistemically it entails you to hold the belief there are no gods. Right? Ernst Frieda says, Steve, you're a little too prone to calling lack-theists inept the moment you get frustrated with them. Best not to engage at all or keep cool. No, I do that, sure, but I have no problem with that. Look, I'm inept in a lot of fields. If I talk to a geologist, I'm probably going to be told I'm inept at geology, because I am. I really have no knowledge of geology that much. It's just not a field that I study. If I talk to a brain surgeon, I'm going to be inept at brain surgery. Do you want me operating your brain? No. Why? Because I'm inept at it. I have no idea how to operate in your brain. I don't take that as an insult. I take it as a fact. So, yes, there are lack-theists out there that are completely inept in this topic because they don't have the basic rudimentary understanding of it. They're inept. If they get insulted by that, I really don't care. It's a time saver. Because, again, if somebody tells me I'm inept at brain surgery, I'm going to be like, yeah, you're damn right I am. I'm not going to operate in your brain.
Or to put this all another way, I'll give the last word to Oppie.
I don't really care. Right, and I don't think other people should, about different uses of the word in different communities. It's just that once you start talking to people who use the word differently, you have to be clear about.
Yeah.
I mean, either you, for the purposes of your conversation, you agree that you're going to use the word a certain way, or you're just very careful to translate backwards and forwards so that
I agree with
there's
100%.
no confusion. Because what matters is not the word. What matters is the thoughts that are being expressed.
And Oppie's exactly right, but it's also important to distinguish between the literature and what they're saying. When I tell people this is how it is in the literature and I'm told I'm wrong, or that the literature is wrong, that's where they jump the shark.
Because what matters is not the word. What matters is the thoughts that are being expressed.
Right. But if somebody says, look, I have no position either way, and I'm like, hey, look, I'm in the same position as you. I'm an agnostic on it. And they go, no, you're an atheist. I'm done with them. I'm done with them. They're, as I pointed out, somebody else pointed out, I think they're inept. All right? Because now they're assigning a label to me that I'm not. But I don't go around telling them they're agnostic. Right? If you tell me you're a atheist and you have no position either way, I'll say in the literature that's called agnostic on P. You're agnostic on the proposition. That's not labeling them. That is a statement of fact. They're agnostic on proposition as how it's understood in the literature. I'm not saying they're agnostic. I'll still call them an atheist. I'll call them an atheist and they call me agnostic, but we have the same position, which is confusing. But that's what Oppie just said. You have to jump back and forth, which perfectly fine. I mean, I could not agree with Oppie more on this. I'm an agnostic. They're an atheist, but we have the same position that we don't have a belief either way for those types of lacktheist, right? But I won't label them an agnostic. I just ask them, don't label me atheist. And you know what? They can't abide by that. A lot of them can't. They're like, oh, Steve, you're an agnostic. You just don't want to, I mean, you're an atheist. You don't want to admit it. Blah, blah. And then they start going into emotional argumentation. Like, you're just afraid of this and that. I'm like, oh, good grief. Look, I am no stranger to controversy, of all people on the internet. I mean, I've had videos, people like S.J. Thomason once called me one of the most controversial people on the internet. And I'm like, what's controversial about me, really? But I'm not adverse to having discussions that some people, for some reason, find controversial. If I was an atheist, I'd be the first person out there going, yes, I'm an atheist. There are no gods. Let me explain to you why. But that's not my position. Although I do know atheist arguments, and I'm happy to discuss those atheist arguments and talk about them. Right? But yeah, to say that I'm fearful of taking the atheist label has got to be one of the dumbest arguments I've ever heard. Me of all people, I don't give a shit what people think when it comes to that. I put out what I believe, and if people want to listen, if people agree or they just disagree, we can talk about it. But I've never, ever, since I've been on the YouTube, can think of something where I've just said, hey, I don't want to do this because, how many people think. It's nothing that I really concern myself about. If I have that position where I care about what people think, I just probably won't be talking about it, right? Because there are some very, very controversial topics that if I got into, I don't think there are people out there that will take it well in order to have a dialogue with it. And they'll twist it and distort it, and so why bother, right? Because they're not honest people. I can have an honest dialogue with certain people. If people that I know that are my subscribers and people that are members and things of that nature, they're honest people that have a dialogue with me, then we can have sensitive topic discussions and maybe have really great engagement. But unfortunately, the distractors out there, the people out there that are not honest, they're not capable of that. And they're not wanting to. They want to take these controversial topics and basically make something more out of them than they are, because they're not interested in having a dialogue about it to see if there's any kind of resolution. They just want views. And I hate that.
Alrighty, let's recap and wrap up. In the first chapter, we emphasised that words don't have intrinsic meanings, but rather usages, and consequently, anyone who insists that a word must be defined in a specific way either doesn't really understand how language works, or is probably trying to control a narrative.
I agree with them on that.
In the second chapter, we explored the epistemic psychological definition of atheism, and considered a few reasons as to why it's so heavily favored.
I do have a little issue with this, though, real quick, and I probably should point this out earlier. So if Rationality Rules makes it to this part in the video, this is a 2-hour video, and I'm going to end it here in a few minutes. The epistemic and psychological definitions are two different things. Okay? And he conflates them into one. Psychological definition is the psychological state, right? It's a psychological belief. The epistemic definition deals with dealing with belief, the dosastic or knowability, right? So epistemics deals with knowledge and beliefs and things of that nature. That's epistemology. So we're talking about the dosastic portion of it is the definition. The psychological is different. So epistemic and psychological, I think, are used. They're not the same thing. The epistemic and psychological definitions are not the same thing. Epistemic definition of atheism would be the dosastic position, the belief position. The epistemic positions of agnosticism deal with the knowability of gods, right? That you believe gods are noble. It's still dosastic, right? So if if you're talking about the epistemic question of knowability of gods, the proposition is gods are knowable, but it's asking about your belief on that, which is gnostic. So when even people say what agnosticism deals with knowledge, well, no, it's still a belief position. It's just a belief position about the knowability of gods. So I think there might be some, conflating between the two here, but maybe I'm wrong, but we'll see.
Favored by most self-described atheists. In short, just as we tend to say that we don't believe in such things as astrology and reincarnation without technically affirming the negative, the same is true for most atheists.
But I think most
when
people
it comes
do affirm
to
the
theism.
negative. I mean,
now
look,
you might have
astrology is
grievances with
bullshit.
this
Look, Rationality rules. Astrology is bullshit. Bullshit. I'm happy to assert that.
Definition, believing it deficient and limited, but this is simply the nature of informal language. Many colloquial words, such as theory, are deficient when scrutinized. In the third chapter, we explored atheism as defined as the metaphysical proposition that there are no gods, and considered a few reasons as to why this definition is favored in the philosophical literature. In short,
I think it's favored by people that are educated in the topic. I don't know why you would limit the scope to just philosophers.
It's favored because philosophers are not so much concerned about what people believe, but rather what's true. And one psychological state isn't a proposition.
They recognize the fact that the lack of belief usage has huge issues to it.
In Chapter 4, we reiterated that it's perfectly fine for the word atheism to have multiple valid definitions, just as it's perfectly fine to have multiple definitions of other words.
Right, and I don't see anybody really arguing against that. I mean, there might be one or two theists out there, but hey, look, they can come talk to me about it. But generally speaking, I don't think anybody really goes around saying there's only one correct usage, but atheist. They're 95, hell with it, 99% probably of all the discussions I have about people that say there's only one usage are atheists. They're not the theist. There are some, maybe Cameron Patuzzi does, I don't know. But for the most part, it is atheists to say there's one definition, only one definition. Go look at American Atheists, go look at the About page. They're very explicit about that.
Such as theory. Okay, so we're done. Or at least I am for now.
Yeah, and I'm going to end it there. He just promotes himself. Go subscribe to Rationality Rules. Like I said, he has some really good stuff. He's always willing to have these dialogues, which is the one thing I really respect about Rationality Rules. He doesn't shy away from controversy either. People remember the big kerfluffle with him before with the atheist community, and it led to a lot of dialogue. And I think that's amazing. I think that's awesome. I mean, the fact that the video that he had led to a lot of discussion, to me, is what an influencer is all about. He's an influencer. I'm labeled a micro influencer, which is nowhere near the status he has because he has 300,000 subs. But I've influenced people. My arguments have been talked about all over the world. My arguments have been talked about in atheist communities. It's a shame that I don't think the bigger atheists talk about them because they can't assail them. That's the problem. If they thought they could assail them, they would talk about my arguments. Right? They would shit all over them. I go, look at Steve. He's an idiot. Here's his argument. Let me point out why the argument's flawed. None of them have done that, which is telling in itself. Right? I mean, if Matt Dillahunty thought my arguments were so bad, show me. Show everybody. Look, if he finds fault with them, I'll modify my positions on them. I'm not married to anything. If people can show that my logic is false, I have to accept the logic is false. Right? Just like that one person who did a PDF, criticizing my WASP argument. Or was it my semantic collapse? Well, I think it was kind of both. But I mean, he going down the wrong road because, again, I wasn't arguing there are not epistemic differences between weak atheism and agnosticism. Right? One is a suspension of judgment. The other one could just be a person who just doesn't believe in the positive. And so there is some epistemic things to be entailed there. But both of them logically hold the same position. Neither believe or disbelieve. So, logically they have to hold the same symbolism. Which, if you read my work, you'll learn about that logic stuff. But anyways, I'm going to wrap it up. It is 2 hours. I wanted to keep it down below that. I know we have people coming over here at 3 o'clock to look at the house. And so I don't want to be on here when they get here. But thank you guys for watching. Let me know what you guys think. Feel free to review this video. Leave your comments in the video section. Like, subscribe, become a member and Patreon. I really appreciate it. And I really hope Rationality Rules watches this. I know it's a long video. Hope he does it at like 1.5 speed. And there's a takeaway from it. Maybe he'll do a video. But I think him and I should have a discussion on this one-on-one, and it'd be on my channel or his channel. I don't care. But he's one of the very few atheist people of that size that I have a lot of respect for his integrity. I don't think he really does any of this just for the views. I think he does it because he really does have a passion for it. He wants to learn philosophy, and he's good at it. He has an aptitude for it. And I how can I not respect that? Look, so somebody like myself who is a lay person in philosophy that 10 years ago thought all philosophy was bullshit myself, I had to come through those steps just like anybody else. And I think he's arriving where I was, what was it, 7 or 8 years ago or so, when I realized, maybe I need to reevaluate this stuff. Maybe there's a lot more to it than I really cared to admit, because I got to tell you, I mean, especially when I remember I was like 35 or something, give or take, when I had my daughter, I wasn't into philosophy at all. I just really thought it was just, so I had to learn things myself, and it wasn't until much later in life that I familiarize myself with philosophy a little bit and learn some of the basics. So if I can do it, anybody can do it. And I hope you guys, will as well, if you want to get into these discussions. But like I said, please help the channel and share this video out there. Get some theists involved. Ask them what their thoughts are and all this stuff. So with that, I will leave you guys with that. I don't know if we're going to do a caffeine. I don't know if we're going to be doing a judgment call tomorrow or not. I have some medical things I need to take care of. Nothing bad, routine stuff. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to work that in. I don't know what Cheshire's doing. She has some stuff coming up. I think she has a video coming out this week. Go check out her channel. And with that, guys, thank you all for your support, and I appreciate all that you do. And we'll see you later. Good night.